I spent a year in Germany as a student, and I spent one semester as a student, one semester I actually had a job working at a manufacturing plant. And I moved to that city to get that job, and the first night I was there, I knew I was going to be, the company had found a room for me somewhere, and I didn't know where it was going to be. Well, I was at a bar, and I met this guy, who was also American. And when you're in a foreign country, you tend to kind of buddy up with people that are from the same place you are. And so we got talking about things. Hey, Francis.
The target booth is really closer.
Reading the story.
So we got started talking, and he asked me about what my living arrangements were, and I told him. He said, "Listen, you know what? I've got a huge place. You're welcome to stay there if you don't like the place that they got for you." Well, the place they got for me was a little room in this old lady's house with a hot plate, and it was going to be awkward to me to be living with this little old lady. So I said, "You know what? This guy, he seemed like a nice guy. Let me go and see if I can stay with him." So I ended up paying this guy rent, and I lived in his place. And we became friends. We'd hang out together. And he was American, but he had grown up in Germany. His dad was military, and his mother was German. And his family still lived in Bonn, which was a few hours away. Well, anyway, one weekend we went up there to visit, and we were sitting at their house. They had a fantastic house on the mountainside. He was a retired colonel, and he had originally joined the army during World War II and come to Germany to fight.
He's old.
Yeah, he was very old. The dad was very old. The guy was a little bit older than me, but not much. Anyway, we were sitting at dinner, and I was just asking him about their background and, how long he'd been in Germany and all that stuff. And he told me this story. And it was when he was a soldier in Germany, they were in some battle where their whole battalion got captured by the Germans. And they took him to this prison camp, and he was, I guess, one of the people in this battalion was one of Patton's sons-in-law or nephew, or had some sort of connection to Patton. And so Patton created this plan to go and break open that prison camp. And they do. There's this big battle in the prison. All the guards, run away from the camp, and the camp gets busted open. But it's not like it's a clear-cut thing. It's not like the Americans just came in and took over. A lot of guys managed to escape, and he was one of the people who escaped. And they just got out into the woods and just running full speed as far as they could, as fast as they could, to try to get away. Well, they finally got to the point that they just couldn't even breathe anymore, and they were completely exhausted. They stopped running, and it was just him and three other guys. And those guys, or two other guys, I think it was. And those guys were French officers, and then he was American. They didn't speak English. He didn't speak French, but they were stuck here in the German countryside with no place. They didn't have any food. They didn't have any water. They had no shelter. They had nothing. And so they just started walking, and they were walking along this ridge line, and I guess at one point they looked down, and this battle was still raging between the Germans and the Americans, and they watched this tank battle going on down below them. But they couldn't get to the Americans from where they were. So they just kept hiking and walking, and they were completely exhausted and starving and cold and thirsty. And they came to this small village, and there was a farmhouse outside of the village, and they didn't know what else to do, so they just went up to the door, and they knocked on the door, and they hoped that maybe these people would help them. Well, the other person opened the door and took them in, took all three of them and put them back in the barn, back behind the house, and gave them whatever, shared whatever food they had, because these people were starving also. There was no food in Germany at that time. And got them water and, got them a place that they could sleep, and they stayed there for like a few days. And I guess during this period of time that these German people were helping out these guys, and then nobody could communicate. It was all just sign language, can you give us something to eat and that sort of thing. That the guy kind of developed this little bond with the little girl that was living in that house at the time. And it was time to leave, and they decided they were going to move on, and he wanted to do something for these people because they had been so good to them. But he of course, didn't have anything. But he did have a pen that his father had given him when he went to leave for war so he could write home. And so he took his pen, and he handed it to this little girl. And then they left. So anyway, the guy, obviously, the war ended, and the guy ended up staying in Germany and had a very good career in the military, and was, retired and now a consultant. And anyway, he was talking to his wife one time, and he said, I'd kind of like to go back and retrace those steps and see if I can figure out where that camp was, and, where it was that we hiked through in the town that we were at. Because at the time, I didn't really understand the area too well. So they go back to that area, and they're driving around looking at things, and he's saying, yeah, I think this is where the camp was, and I think we went this direction. Oh, I bet this is the town that we were at. And they go into that little village, and sure enough, that farmhouse is still sitting there. And so he said, I just want to go up there and see if they'll let us walk around and take a look at the place, because I'm pretty sure this is the same farmhouse. So they go, and they knock on the door, and he still doesn't speak German, but the wife obviously does. And the wife starts explaining, a woman answers the door, and she's probably in her 50s or so, and the wife of the man starts explaining to the woman who answered the door the whole story and about, the prisoners coming and how they stayed in the barn. And the woman is listening to the story, and she starts to cry, and she says, wait just a minute. She leaves, she comes back, she holds up the pen. She was the little girl that was in that house.
Aww.
Oh.
It's really
I thought they were